A good friend.
A dear person.
Someone we both look up to, aspire to be like. Someone who's so kind.
I just want to be like Gail.
On this episode of On the Line with Daniel Holzman and Amanda Freitag, we are welcoming, with open arms,
Gail Simmons.
Gail Simmons.
Welcome, Gail. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to both of you.
Our podcast called On the Line, and Dan is going to give you an introduction like you've never had before.
That's not true.
can't wait.
I did a terrible job. I just reread it and now I feel embarrassed.
Now the lead up.
You can add, you can improv.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read the whole thing. I won't do it.
You don't have
want
to
me
read a whole. I hope you're not
Read
like
what
reading
you
my
wrote.
bio.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to read your bio.
No, that's horrifying.
Yeah, I know. That's the whole
It's
point.
way
That's the whole
too
point.
much.
He wrote something special for
Oh,
I did
okay,
write
great.
something special for
Oh,
you.
I can't wait.
just that.
Okay, so most of you know, welcome, Gail Simmons, obviously. Not related to Russell Simmons.
Well, we like to say we mutually. I like to pretend because we.
Because of your sense of humor.
There's Russell. There's Gene. You know, we're a close knit group.
Yeah, the Simmons is
Yeah.
the epitome of class.
Oh.
Uh-huh. Most of you know her from years working as a permanent judge of the beloved #1 television food show, Top Chef. Top Chef.
Mm-hmm.
Now in its 21st season.
It's wild.
Forever. I mean, that's a lot of people. How many people
I was
per episode?
7 when we started making that show. I just wanna
How
be
many
clear.
how many people per episode?
There's it has differed over the years. We've had as many as like 18 to 20 contestants starting, but
Times
generally
20.
there's 15 chefs per season.
So you know 370
Plus.
blah blah blah. Got it. Define. Okay. So and many of you know her from many of her other roles, leading, hosting, judging, cooking, challenging, and otherwise warming our hearts while educating our culinary palates on television. However, she's not acting, ladies and gentlemen.
that is for sure.
Gail is the real deal. She cut her teeth amongst the best of them, working in some of New York's toughest and most beloved kitchens. On the line and in the weeds. Gail is a respected food journalist, a wonderful food writer, a fantastic cookbook author, but of all her many accolades and accomplishments, perhaps her most profound superpower is her extraordinary ability to translate the seemingly incomprehensible, the impossibly complicated, and distill it down into the essence and communicate it effortlessly, unlike me, without a hint of condescension, which is something and I like to be smarter than people, but you are smarter than people and you don't make them feel bad about it.
I don't know about that, but I'll take it.
She's a spectacular orator and deeply intelligent, with a deeply intelligent understanding of the world. Basically, she's a genius and everybody loves her. And please welcome, before she wrings my neck for being obsequious, someone who I've always envied. And I thank you for being here.
Yes.
It's my pleasure. I'm really genuinely blushing. I feel like there's a lot of heat in my cheeks. That was extraordinarily kind. I hope you can maybe just follow me around on the street
got a
and
little
introduce
violin.
me to everyone that way. That was incredibly generous.
It's true.
Completely over-exaggerated, but incredibly generous.
But like,
Not at all.
Of all the people in the world, no one has ever said an unkind word about you that I've ever heard. And I've
You just haven't asked
and
the
I
right
talk,
people.
but I talk about you all the time
Obviously,
as well. We're constantly talking
Yes.
about you.
It's nice. I like being kind to people. I try to be kind. I also this might sound trite, but I truly love what I do. I believe I have, as the two of you have as well, been given this incredible opportunity to love the work that I do and find exciting things about it every day. So I don't have I think it's positive. I try to start there.
Yeah. When you have that kind of gratitude, it just oozes out of you. You know?
I hope so. You think so? Some days are not excellent.
Oh, you're
It's
only
hard
human.
not to be negative in the
Yes, especially right now.
It's a tough time. But I admire you, and Dan speaks for both of us when he says you're beloved, and we followed your career for a long time. So I think a lot of people don't know. They only know you from Top Chef.
Yes, sure.
They don't know that you were, at Food and Wine magazine. You were working with Dana Cowan. You were doing multiple things. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Sure,
Because
of
I don't think
course.
everybody, any
I
listener.
it depends on how far you want to go back, because I am,
The
I'm
early
old.
aughts?
Yeah, at least the early aughts. That's actually we should start, but I won't go too far. But it's true. I grew up in Canada, and I
Quebecois?
no, I went to college in Montreal. and then graduate. But I grew up in Toronto, went back to Toronto after college, and realized I wanted to write about food. My dream was to be a food writer, really not knowing what that meant, because when you're 22 and you graduate college, and you have no idea what any job actually means, right? And I decided that I loved food and cooking and that I wanted to write about it, but obviously I had no idea how to do that. I worked in Canada for a newspaper and a magazine for a year. And when it really became apparent that that was the beat that I wanted, I realized there just aren't a lot, or at the time, 147 years ago, there were not a lot of opportunities in Canada. All the major publishers, because that was also before social media and before a lot of online properties were what they are now. So it really meant print magazines. That's what media meant, right? Newspapers, magazines, print. And so I realized most of that was in New York. But I also realized, because someone told me quite bluntly, that I knew nothing about food, and that if I really wanted to write about food.
Did they say it with a great accent, you know nothing?
I wish. No, they had them with a Canadian accent, so I don't even know if I can do that.
They said it really nice. They're
it was really nice, exactly. It was very polite.
Canadians are so
But it was
lovely.
a slap in the face, and they were absolutely right. And they were like, look, why don't you go learn about food first, because anyone can write. And so I went to New York, and I came to New York, enrolled in culinary school, went to culinary school, and then thought, okay, now I can go be a food writer. But my culinary school rightfully explained to me that I still knew nothing about food. Just because you've cooked everything once in a very
controlled situation.
Exactly, a perfect setting, you still don't know what it's like to be a cook.
I just talked to Jonathan Waxman for I don't know, and I realized I have no idea. I don't know anything about food.
Right.
I don't know anything.
But that's
when we're
what's so
80,
kind of
we
great
can all
about
get
it.
back together.
Yeah, right.
Well, when you went
true.
to culinary school, it was Peter Combs.
Yes,
correct.
it was Peter
So
Combs.
Mark Murphy was a guest, and he went to Peter Combs as well, a school that no longer is called that. I think
it's ICE.
became ICE.
Yep.
And
Institute of Culinary Education.
And I
Now.
didn't realize till I was doing a little bit of research that you did an intern at Vong.
Oh, yeah, no, I cooked at Vong for a while.
I was a line cook at Vong.
What? Okay, we're just going to go here for 1 second. When? Because
talk
Vong
about-
was beloved, but has
Vong was
been
a phenomenal
deceased.
restaurant. John George in the Lipstick Building.
Yep.
And so
Thai,
named because it looks like
French.
lipstick.
Yeah. It was an Asian ingredients, French technique at a time when no one else was doing that.
No one was doing it. This is going to age me. I was a line cook there in 1992.
Okay. I mean, I was there in 99.
Yeah. And I worked with Dan Del Vecchio side by side, who is still
Wow.
John George's
Yep.
right-hand
Yep.
man. And it taught
Was
me...
Pierre Shadlin, the chef, still there?
When I was
remember.
there, James Chu was the chef, and
Okay.
then Pierre came in and took over.
Yeah.
But I was talking about how it trained my palate differently.
It introduced me to 10,000 ingredients that in my life I had never seen before, never known about. I mean, it was such a formative moment cooking there. And I started in garde manger, but I did dessert service because there wasn't a dessert person at night. And I worked, I moved a bit. Mm-hmm. It was the last professional restaurant I worked in.
Really?
And then I went back into what I had originally set out to do. I worked at Le Cirque 2000 before Vong, and then I went to Vong. And then from Vong, always knowing, I went to work in both of these kitchens after culinary school, knowing that my goal was really still print and writing. But I really did understand, I had the insight, the foresight at the time, that I still knew nothing and that I needed to sort of get my skills up, speak that language if I truly wanted to write about it with any authority.
Right. I love
And
that
so
you did
that was that. And then I left Vong to go to Vogue magazine, where I worked for Jeffrey Steingarten for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And from there, I
The man who ate
everything.
The man
Yes.
who ate everything.
And he did.
He did.
He ate me alive a few times
Oh,
on
yes.
competitions.
He was on
a
Iron
judge.
Chef for a while.
Yeah.
That was long after I left him. I left him in 2002, went to work for Danielle, and from Danielle went to Food and Wine. And I was at Food and Wine for 15 years.
Wow.
But in very different capacities. Like when I started at Food and Wine, I was doing one job, and then I took over the Classic in Aspen, and within a year of doing that, started doing Top Chef, and ultimately had to stop doing the other stuff because Top Chef, as part of my job for Food and Wine, grew into this thing that we could have never imagined.
Right. So, okay, you worked under Jeffrey Steingarten.
Yes.
Can
was
you describe him a
lot.
little to people who may not know who he
Yes,
is?
yes. Jeffrey was the food critic at Vogue, really the first ever. I mean, it feels also, when you think about Vogue, you don't necessarily think about food criticism, but it was for 30 years or more a a place that had like this man who wrote long format, very detailed, in-depth journalism on food. I mean, he wrote these essays once a month on single subjects, and really his research and his ability to like self-deprecation and he just had such an incredible skill as a writer and such a true devotion to eating that I don't think there's like any writer of our time that kind of paralleled the writing he did. And it was turned into his writing, his essays in Vogue were turned into several books, award-winning books. The first was called The Man Who Ate Everything. And that's how I found him, from reading that book when I was a line cook. I would like go home at night and read
that
it
book
late at night when no one else was around to hang out.
So you got a little training from him.
He not only was a brilliant person, but a bit of a kind of mad scientist. I should say. He is alive. He's just not writing as much anymore.
Do you still have a relationship with him?
I haven't seen him in many years, really since before COVID.
Did you get to dine with him
all
at
the time?
Really?
Wow. Yeah. We worked out of his home.
What an experience.
How did you get that job working for him?
When I was at Vong, it's actually sort of like Vong plays a key role in the story of getting that job with Jeffrey. I was at Vong. All my girlfriends had normal jobs, so as you guys can relate, when you're working when you're working the line of a restaurant, you keep the opposite hours of all your friends, and so while all the line cooks would go out at night after service and get up to trouble, I went home and would read anything I could get my hands on. And I was living at the time with a good friend who worked in finance, so we literally kept opposite hours. We never saw each other, and someone gave me The Man Who Ate Everything. I had never picked up Vogue in my life. I had never heard anything about Jeffrey. I didn't, I wore like a stained Old Navy t-shirt.
This old thing.
Yeah, right? And I read that book and I was just riveted because, first of all, the way he writes is so extraordinarily different than any food writing I'd ever read before. But in the book, he mentions many times his assistant, and whether it's always a woman, and whether she is testing recipes in his kitchen or going out to the green market to, find new ingredients, or going to the New York Public Library to research some obscure cultural, food phenomenon. It felt like the job that I wanted, that I could never articulate, because I knew I wasn't going to graduate culinary school and then as a line cook just become the next editor-in-chief of Gourmet magazine, which at the time was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I knew that there were some steps involved, but I had never known how to move from one to the other. And I read about his assistant and I was like, well, that's it. That's the job. This person gets to do everything. I took the book back to culinary school, back to Peter Kumps, which is now ICE, and to their career services guy, who I had a good friendship with. He was a really nice, smart man. And I held up the book as if I was the first person to ever read this New York Times best-selling book. And I was like, do you know this guy? This is the type of job I want. I want to be an assistant to someone like Jeffrey. And I kid you not, he said to me, I saw Jeffrey last week. He's looking for an assistant.
Stop.
Wow.
It was just timing.
Kismet.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
And he called him, sent him my resume. I was still working at Vong. I was working on the line, sent him my resume. That was a Monday. I had an interview Wednesday. And he emailed me. It must have been that he emailed me before that day, before the interview, to say, I see you're working at Vong right now. It would behoove you on your way in to our interview this evening, because I was working the lunch shift that day, so I could only see him at 5 p.m. or whenever I got off work. It would behoove you to bring me a few of their duck spring rolls if you're able. So of course that was on my station. That was one of my jobs, so it was easy to do. So before I finished service, I tucked a few duck spring rolls into my backpack.
She put a couple of spring rolls in her pocket.
As you do.
As one does.
And that's pretty much how I got the job.
Yeah.
What an extraordinary request. I mean, he is just... were you
by
intimidated
design,
by him?
Incredibly. I went into that interview. It was 3 hours long. He made me taste wine blind, translate. I put on my resume that I speak Spanish and French. which I do, but by no means am I fluent. But you put things on your resume to bulk your resume up, not ever thinking they're going to call you on it. He opened the Il Bulli cookbook
and asked you to read?
and was like, you speak Spanish, translate this recipe for me. I mean, it was the most intimidating interview. Oh my God. He was recipe testing some sort of Brazilian meat at the time. He made me test it and taste it and give him notes. It was the exact kind of interview that, like, in a lifetime I never thought I would get, and knew that I bombed. I was like, you know what? I walked out invigorated. I was like, well, I failed that interview so miserably, but it doesn't matter because that was my New York moment. I got to spend 3 hours talking to Jeffrey Steingarten. At one point he asked me what was my favorite restaurant in New York. Where had I been eating? Now, remember, I had just moved to New York 6 months before.
And you're working in the kitchen every day.
And I have no money. I was living in my friend's closet. Making
Who puts Gail Simmons in a closet?
I mean, a lot of people. And I was making like $7 an hour. Where was I eating? Like, I was eating family meal. And then, but I had just recently gone to a sushi place in the Village. I could still be there. I don't know.
Oh my God, I've heard you tell this story. It's so great. That was my favorite. When you told this story, I was so upset because I love that restaurant.
Yeah, we all loved Tomo. It was this like sushi restaurant that everyone thought was like amazing. Lines out the door around the corner, you can't get in. And I'd gotten in. And he looked at me and he was like, well, you obviously don't read Vogue magazine, do you? Which is like, yes, I do not. That is true. But also, you don't want your
Could you tell that from my outfit or was it my food knowledge?
It's like, I was so busted, and he was like, because if you read Vogue, you would know that my article in the September issue was all about how much I hate Tomo. And I was like, all right, so I'm out. I failed. But he called me 2 days later and gave me the job.
Wow. I think
it was part of the hazing.
Perseverance. Yes, you persevered through that interview, and he saw.
I think you realize in hindsight that he wasn't looking for me to get the answers right. He was looking for my ability to answer, to be challenged, to take criticism, to be brave. He didn't want like a wallflower. He wanted someone who like had a thirst for knowledge and was like willing to be molded in his image. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Wow. Well.
So that was that.
I got real excited. I was like, I already heard the story. Can you tell me that story one more time?
Sorry,
I'm so excited.
I've only got so many stories.
I love Tomo. I heard you. I was like, listen. I was like, I love that restaurant. Yeah. Why did he hate it? I want to ask him.
Because it wasn't like pure enough.
It wasn't Japanese. They had big fish. Because it was affordable and it had a vibe and it was great. And
of course, he hated it.
Yeah.
That
was it.
Okay, so
anyway, worked for him for 2 years.
To go from Jeffrey to Dana is a very different.
Oh my God.
First of all, do they have anything that's similar, the two of them?
I mean, yes. I think they both have like deep knowledge of the industry.
Journalistic integrity.
Journalistic integrity, bar none. And it pretty much ends there.
Yeah.
But you know what about Dana, who was the editor-in-chief of Food and Wine for 21 years, is that she appreciated and understood Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah.
And so also had a lot of empathy for me, which is also why Danielle Ballou hired me, because I worked for Danielle for 3 years in between the two. And I think he hired me out of pity.
Because he
was like,
Jeffrey.
We just got to get you out of there.
Was Jeffrey just a tough, was he a
he was
tough?
But he was amazing. I mean, I learned, I literally credit Jeffrey. He like gave me an education. You know what I mean?
I will never forget. So I competed on Next Iron Chef, and he was a judge. And
was that the Japan trip?
Yes.
I've heard so many stories.
Trip, but prior to that, it was a challenge to go cook in a market in LA and then bring it back. Shop in a market in LA, bring it back, cook it, blah blah blah. And of course, you're under time constraint, and we cooked, and I got this shrimp, and it was mealy. It was terrible. But I was in a rush. I couldn't check out every shrimp at the market. Cameras running behind us. And he said, this dish is not good, and this is a symptom of bad shopping, not bad cooking. And I don't know why at that time it was
pierced
like
your soul,
dagger in my heart.
But he knew.
Of course he knew, and it was like he could see through me. And he wasn't there at the market when we were running around picking up our stuff, and I was like, it hurt me as a chef because we believe so much in good sourcing.
Yes.
And obviously all of the competition stuff is unnatural and unrealistic, and I felt like I disappointed my dad.
Oh, God.
You know
I
that
feel
feeling?
That deeply. Yes, for so many reasons.
Yes.
Yeah, I felt that with him often. But in the end, And he has a sharp tongue. I mean, like he never minced words with me either, working for him. But
do you take that as a sign of respect, or is it?
I do in the end, and I sort of, in a way, I don't want to excuse it in some ways because I think he was also a part of a culture that at the time,
It was
like
abusive and
kitchen
rude
culture
and,
or like Vogue magazine. I mean, that movie got made. It wasn't like a. I was there when I was working for Jeffrey. The woman who wrote The Devil Wears Prada was Anna's assistant. That's who I spoke to on the phone every day. That was my era.
Wow.
So like the kitchen culture that was also mirroring it. It was a time when that was kind of okay. He was never ever like inappropriate with me. It wasn't that way, but he was certainly.
He's like
difficult.
Yeah.
And but I think in the end he was really proud of me and he pushed me because he knew he can, and he knew that I would push back, right?
So then you have this small bridge of Danielle Ballou going over to Dana. Like so you get to Danielle and you're doing events.
Yeah, I was doing events and PR. I was working under a woman named Georgette Farkas, who was his marketing director. Yeah. Yes, the chicken lady.
Georgette.
Who now is back with Danielle opening Cafe Ballou.
Really?
Which is amazing.
She makes a great chicken.
I love her.
Sure does. And so she was my boss. She was the marketing director, and it was also like at a time when Danielle had 3 restaurants all in New York, and so it was like a much smaller restaurant company. Now it's global. He just opened in Singapore yesterday and Beijing the day before. Like it's a whole other universe now. But he was like my fairy godfather. He just swooped me up as he does to so many people in New York, and I wasn't in his kitchen, gratefully. I don't think I could have survived. But I got to be part of this very small team that I wrote 3 books with him. I opened 3 restaurants.
Wow.
I was there at like a pivotal moment when I think the restaurant was really growing and like the people who were working around me, which is I think what Danielle does best of all. He surrounds himself with the most amazing people. I was with, Andrew Carmelini and Alex Lee and just everyone who went through his kitchen, Lior Lev Surkars and David Chang and Rich Teresi and all these guys who went on to become like the backbone of New York City restaurants. And watching kind of their trajectories were like this great family of people.
Wow. I mean, the idea that like one place in one time, so many people come through.
It's bananas.
It's mind-boggling, and that's just been a through line through every time we
Any
talk to
chef
somebody.
you
It's
speak
like,
to.
It was a wonderful time, and when you talk about Danielle just having a couple of restaurants in New York at that time, it was the same with John George with Vong when I was there in '92. He had Vong and JoJo. That was it.
It's crazy.
And so he would bounce between the two. So if I went, I would go in a little bit early and just try to catch up on my shit because I was always in the weeds.
Yeah.
And he would be there. And so I had these moments where I would roll tuna rolls with him or spring rolls with him
he
in
was
the
the
kitchen.
best dressed.
And
He still is.
Best dressed.
now
Most handsome.
Yeah.
he's a global entity just like Danielle
question.
now. So it was a weird little nugget of time.
Yeah.
Where somebody like you got to be a part of that. Somebody like me got to be a part of that.
It's an amazing like family tree.
Yeah, when I was in the kitchen at Vong, I was the only woman. I don't know.
I was too.
Yeah.
And it was a smaller kitchen. Like I'd come from
Yes.
Le Cirque, which was a much bigger kitchen where I also was the only woman.
Yes.
And going to Vong, I was still the only woman,
Yeah.
but on a much smaller team. So even though it was a challenge, it felt a little more like connected.
Yes.
I really liked the kitchen at Vong. I
did
struggled
too.
a lot at the kitchen at Le Cirque.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why? Just because it was a
It was
bigger
huge
place. It was hard
and
to.
vast, and the culture
And
was
your first kitchen
I was an
job, so-
apprentice, right?
yeah.
Like but they put me. It was an open kitchen, and it was just like incredibly formal, 4-star kitchen.
It was the one that the Bloomberg building.
It was
now?
before the Bloomberg
that
building
one.
at the
Okay.
Palace Hotel,
Oh wow.
and it was just like just not
A
a
different.
nurturing place to work.
Yeah.
Every time you talk about, I just think about like the Cirque in Vegas with the. I think they had like a wine cellar with a person on a bungee cord.
on a pellet.
Like a
They were
bungee cord.
they
would like
did.
bungee down through a glass dome to
Obviously.
get your wine. I'm just like,
Those were the days.
man.
Those
other things of those.
I mean, like, imagine being like investors. Here's my plan.
The sommeliers will rappel down the wall.
It was actually pink. That was where she started her career.
Pretty
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So I was like, oh, you had the bungee job. I remember you.
Yeah, I know. I wish.
With the
Oh my God, it was a great time in New York. Okay, so now you're with Dana.
So then I moved to Food and Wine, and actually, when I started at Food and Wine, I wasn't hired by Dana. I was hired by the publisher and the VP of Marketing, Christina Gerdovich.
Oh, we all know and love her.
Yeah, who is still a major force in my life.
juggernaut.
She absolutely powerhouse.
Yep.
And she became the publisher, but at the time she was the head of marketing, and I was at Danielle. And I'd become friendly with all the people at Food and Wine because I was doing the PR for Danielle. And Danielle was a former Best New Chef, so they had this relationship with Food and Wine. And they were all in one day for a lunch, an event we were doing. And one of the guys from Food and Wine, I didn't know what his job was, but I'd seen him on television, which was sort of like this weird foreshadowing. He was the guy at Food and Wine who, I didn't know what he did in his day job, but I knew that he was sometimes on TV, like on the Today Show or New York One or Fox and Friends or whatever it was, doing the little like Food and Wine's March issue cooking demonstration or the trends for wine in the fall or whatever it was. So I always thought that was sort of cool that he did TV spots, but I had no idea what he actually did there. And he came up to me and he said, I'm leaving. I am going to open my own restaurant. Would you be interested in interviewing for my job?
Ooh.
And meanwhile, he also said, this is sort of a side story, but it's a good one. And by the way, who is the magnificent woman behind the reservation desk? And I said, yes, and let me introduce you. They got married, had 2 children, and I got his job. It was like a win-win. They now live in San Sebastian. She was from San Sebastian. She became the first female general manager of a 4-star restaurant. She was Danielle's general manager, and then they moved to San Sebastian. She was also a powerhouse. Her name's Maite, and they now run a brewery and restaurant in San Sebastian, and I took his job. And then I went on television.
Wait a second. I'm sorry.
So
you were at Danielle and all these amazing chefs now. You know, if you had foresight or whatever. What was there any? Did any of them make any impression at the time? Was there anybody? That you could tell who was actually good or great, or was there something about?
Absolutely. I mean, Alex Lee, who was Danielle's, CDC for a decade.
Chef de cuisine.
Yes, everyone recognized even then that he was like
A star.
Spectacular.
a magical person. He didn't want the spotlight. That was all for Danielle. He just wanted to cook, and he wanted to teach his cooks and foster that like love of cooking in them. And he did the same for me, even though I wasn't a cook in his kitchen. Like I would hover around a lot and stick my fingers in shit. And he was like he was an amazing person and still is, still a very dear friend and mentor. And so that was apparent. Andrew Carmelini, I joked that he was at Cafe Boulou, which was 10 blocks up the street, and I would go back and forth between the restaurants, but I would always hang out at Cafe Boulou the most because they had the best family meal and the hottest chefs on the line. I can say that now, happily married, and like I was a very good girl, but I'm just saying that was, the motivation when I was 25.
It's a nice crew.
Yeah, and Andrew was amazing and always really great to me, and he was also like, you could tell him and Alex, they were like seriously exceptional at what they did, and they survived Danielle, in 1,000 ways, and remained so true to him, and like watching them cook was amazing.
And 2 very different chefs.
Very, very different.
Andrew Carmelini is the guy that whenever I think like, if I had real discipline and could actually like see my dreams through, who would I imagine myself being? And it's Andrew Carmelini. Every time you go to his restaurant, he's there cooking, and the food is spectacular, and every one of them is just so disciplined.
It's true.
Yeah.
And his partner, Luke, was his sous chef at Cafe Boulou at the time and is my age. And so we were all with, and Rich Teresi was the next on the line. And so seeing all of them, like they were a great team of guys.
I mean, you've made a lifetime of easy reservations.
Yes, that's it. That was the only, I had the foresight there.
You knew.
But Andrew, you're absolutely right about Andrew. Like he has never wavered
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In his devotion to what he does, in his like commitment to excellence in cooking, in loyalty as a person.
Does that translate through like you? Because now you judge. I mean, so many people have come through. We talked about like 400 people have come through your television show. Like, can you pick them? Are you like, do you have that?
Yes and no.
Do you ever go to the horse races?
I know,
Like, you
right?
gotta take her with us.
You know, I wish I could take credit for any of those people back then at Danielle. I'll definitely take some credit for the Top Chef team.
Fair enough.
But, you know, I do think that it, without knowing, you know, you do things in your life. We all do things in our lives that you don't realize the value of until you're at the next stage and can look back and see how it served you. And I do for sure think that my time with Jeffrey, my time with Danielle, and then my time with Dana and Chris at Food and Wine, which was the biggest chunk of my like working life, set me up for a lot of things, right? It taught me a million lessons and introduced me to a million people who like set a very high standard for my own like work ethic and understanding of food. But I also think for the way I kind of viewed the world. And I think that came into play when I started television, which was nothing I set out to do. There was no like judging food when I first went to do it.
It was a real
I think that's
community.
fair.
Don't you feel like New York
Absolutely.
was a different kind of community within
Well, it was
the
like
chefs?
it was smaller because
Yes.
the world felt smaller
Yes.
too. Like Tom Colicchio, who also like in my line of mentors is at the
Unbelievable,
top
handsome,
of it
bald
all.
head.
I mean, you know, we call him America's
He's a
sweetheart.
handsome bald man. I mean,
He's very
that's like a
handsome.
thing.
People's one of on the handsome. What is that? Hottest
lot
man
of
alive list. I don't know.
Was he on that
He
list?
was once, and we
Wow.
love to remind him. As you imagine, it's our favorite thing to remind him about. Literally on set, we
in the
call him
world.
America's sweetheart. And because he is, and he isn't. But he will say, and it's so true that like, and this makes you feel like 100 years old, but also it's a shift, it's a seismic shift in the way we think about food now, is that he was like, when I was a cook, if you wanted to see what other chefs were doing, you had to get on an airplane, right?
Yeah.
Or read a magazine cover to cover and
go
study
to
the
their
recipes, or
restaurant.
go to their restaurants, right? If I wanted to know what the chefs in France or and the chefs in Thailand and the chefs in Tokyo were doing, like you had to literally go there or read the book, you
Yes.
know? and that obviously the world, for better and for worse, but has become so accessible, and I think that has had a lot of impact, whether for better or worse, right?
Right.
But I do think that there is something about television, obviously, that is like two-dimensional, that you can't taste the food, you can't, as a consumer, dine there, so you judge as a viewer. It's a superficial exercise,
Yeah.
right? And I think, or when it's on your phone, right? So I think that kind of plays into that moment of like, and then when you move on to the next thing in 2 seconds. And that has become, you know, we have a very short attention span as consumers, and restaurants, like the math of restaurants is so complicated.
Right. I mean, I think, like you said, it's good and bad, and it drives people to these chefs' restaurants where they never may have gone.
Oh, you've definitely done a
exposure.
net
Yeah.
positive for the industry
yes.
and for food culture.
Yes.
Hands down, right?
Right. So it may keep that restaurant open that was open for 3 months and
that
closed.
shouldn't
You know, it may
For sure.
do that for these people, or it may not. You know, if there's a big failure.
Well, I think you have to prove it. Like, I think it's one thing to get the restaurant open. It's another thing to keep the restaurant open. You know, we talk on behind the scenes on Top Chef all the time because we do feel a responsibility
Yes.
to what we've created. And we're not solely responsible by any means. I can blame Amanda
Yes.
just as much.
Yeah, actually, it's 100% her.
But exactly. I like
I'll
to just
take
blame
it.
Amanda.
I'll take it.
No, but in a way, we also built
Yes.
90% of the talent on the Food Network.
Yeah.
But that's also because we didn't have something for them to go to, so that's on us, right?
Right.
And we're incredibly proud of them. But I was just scrolling on my phone last night and noticed that the next like tournament of champions is 100% Top Chef ex-contestants.
Yes.
100%.
It's very interesting to see because there was a long.
We are a great casting company.
Yes, you are a great casting.
You're
company.
welcome.
There was a long. Yeah, well, there's a long time before when Food Network talent could not mix
Yeah.
with Bravo talent.
Yeah.
And the floodgates
They still don't
are
let me and Tom
open.
mix that much, but
That
the
makes
rest is
sense.
open because our contracts for the contestants are so different.
Right.
Because we only have this one show. It's not as if we have something that they can then do with us afterwards.
Right.
That was never something we figured out.
So you're working with Dana and
So I'm
Chris.
working with Chris and Dana. At first, I'm helping run part of the marketing department, and then very shortly into the job, the woman who ran the Classic in Aspen, which is our premiere event of the year,
The greatest thing you can ever attend.
kind of most acclaimed food festival
Beautiful
of its
setting,
kind,
all the best chefs.
She left to have twins and didn't return, and I took her job. And within months of that happening, Bravo called about this idea for a show. And would we partner on the show, teach them about chefs, because they don't know anything about chefs, but they do know about, they had just finished Project Runway, the first season of Project Runway with Dan's brother.
My big brother, you like?
a little connection
I know,
here.
isn't that funny? And they knew that it was going to be a great format. And they wanted to spin it off into the other pillars of what at the time Bravo was working on. And so food was the next thing, but they didn't know anything about food. So they came to Chris and Dana and said, partner with us on this show, give us the prize, give us the guidance about the chefs. And in turn, if we like one of your editors, we'll put them on the air to represent the magazine on the show. So they sent me for this weird blind screen test. I had no idea what a screen test was. I had no idea what I was getting into.
You had no ambition of being...
Zero. I had done a few spots because remember the guy
I
who
was
was
going to
Yeah,
ask
I
you
remember
about
that
the
guy.
guy.
I took his job, so then there was no one
And
to
he
do
ended
those
up in San
spots.
Sebastian.
Yeah.
You're like, this is pretty great.
Yeah.
It was a perfect trajectory.
Exactly. He did just fine. And he so he had been doing these TV spots, and now they had no one, and they needed someone to fill that spot. And I had the cooking skills, and I had the understanding of public relations from
Shayna
Danielle.
Plum.
I had the whole thing. I knew in theory. They put me through 2 days of media training, and they had me I had probably done 4 television spots, 3-minute cooking demos
Yes.
on New York One
I love New York one.
before I went to that screen test. And they put me in a closet with a video camera and asked me a bunch of weird questions. And I was like,
In the closet again.
it's a theme. It's a theme.
I still remember
not
trying
figuratively.
Out, I
No,
tried out,
literally.
for Top Chef. I recorded a video.
You did not.
I did. I remember looking at it. I was disallowed to even be on the show because my brother was involved with the producer.
Yes, yeah, of course.
So nepotism aside, I would have never gotten it. I recently uncovered the video, and it's so
We're gonna need a
embarrassing
viewing.
and
Oh, we're
hysterical.
going to need that.
I'm sitting there, and I just I'm in this weird chef coat, and I was just very fat.
Please send
I've
it.
lost so much weight since then. Thankfully, I wouldn't have made it. Anyway,
It's
it was so
amazing.
embarrassing.
Isn't that
It was
amazing?
great, yeah.
Well, also reality television has evolved so much since the early days of what we did.
Yes.
It was like a big social experiment. We had no idea. I trusted Food and Wine. Food and Wine trusted Bravo. They said that Tom had just signed on, and we had a relationship with Tom because he was also a former Best New Chef and did a bunch of things with the magazine, obviously. So we knew that they were serious, but otherwise it was like a total crapshoot. At least I was the employee, right? I was the pawn in the game, so I had nothing to lose. I also wasn't known, right? It's not like I had my own reputation.
You still would have had your job at Food and Wine.
I could go back behind the scenes and carry on and forget the whole thing. But I did have Food and Wine's reputation kind of on my back, which, felt
Pretty heavy.
crazy at the time. But, they remained true to form. Bravo was serious about making a show about real cooks and finding great talent. And, the track record worked out.
At the time,
Wow,
I
that's
remember
quite a story.
thinking these guys have Tom Colicchio, who his grill station was the
pinnacle.
You could either work at Danielle, Jean Georges, Le Bernardin, or
Gramercy
Gramercy
Tavern.
Tavern. You worked at that grill station that was and it was the only place you could work with live fire wood in New York City and at a respected establishment. It was the place that everybody wanted to work.
That's cool to hear.
So when when he got kind of was on this show as a cook, I thought, wow, this is the first time the Food Network Bravo,
food
television
television
is doing something legitimate. And actually, I want to watch it.
Yeah.
I want to see these chefs. And it felt so special.
He, as a side note, said no to the show 5 times. The rumor is that originally, he said no, so Scott Conant was going to do it.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
I never confirmed that with Scott, but
I'll ask
that
him.
was the thing, yeah. And then they went back to Tom. I don't know what happened, but again, finally Tom agreed to sign on with some provisions about from the beginning. I mean, he had foresight, he had his reputation, he had his restaurants, and he insisted on being an executive producer from the beginning. And he has been our North Star in terms of the quality of the cooks and the integrity of the show from day one. And I think that's made a big difference, but it felt that way to us too, which is why I think Food and Wine, which was this very, affluent, influential, respected food magazine, no food magazines had been on television before, right? That we understood that there was a massive audience there, but it took some convincing of Dana. Chris and I, mostly Chris, Chris got me to do it and then had to really talk Dana into it because at the time, television and magazines did not really mix.
Not at all.
Right?
There was no connection.
No
between
connection,
them.
and would it be dumbing down the quality of our product?
Yeah, the
and our
magazine
brand?
was legitimate, and it was in print, and and everything else was kind of ambitious embarrassment.
Right. But the broad reach of the audience of television is unmatched, especially now in magazines. But then, and Dana quickly got it, right? And came to understand what Bravo was doing and that they were going to take Food and Wine's lead on that and Tom's lead.
Which is hard to trust.
Yeah.
Television likes to take things and muck them up.
Yep.
It's hard to trust that when you put so much integrity.
And there was no precedent.
Well, there was Meet the Press, and there was
Yes. There was
Meet the Press and Top Chef.
and there was Survivor and Fear Factor and then Iron Chef Japan. Right. That was the only competition
that was
in the
happening
food space
at the time. And that had that Japanese integrity.
It was a whole other thing.
Right, a whole other
that
thing.
was just great showmanship.
Brilliant.
Come on.
Brilliant television.
And it was
spectacular.
And it was really not understood in America initially.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was in Japanese.
It was.
But even just that style
literally,
of the game,
no one understood it.
of course.
It was a guy, samurai sword,
was
screaming at
incredible.
people, running around.
Yep.
First of all, I understand Tom's answer as no to television because I answered no on multiple
You
asks.
did?
Yes, multiple. The first time I was ever asked to do Iron Chef, I said no. And Jesse Gerstein, who's sitting back there in the control room, said it would be really good for the restaurant. I was the chef at the Harrison at the time.
I remember the Harrison very clearly.
They called me. I was in the chef's office. I said, no, thank you. Hung up. It was maybe an hour later that Jesse called me and said, hey, did you just get a call from the Food Network? And did you just say no to Iron Chef? And I was like, yeah, I don't cook like that. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
He's like, listen.
Was that the thing that helped to break your,
That was the first thing I ever did on the Food Network.
Really?
But
Wow.
I also
That's a
said
big
no to
commitment for the
Top
person.
Chef.
So just
Really?
being a contestant?
Yes.
Well, because was Harold at the Harrison with you when he
No,
won?
he was there with Joey.
Yeah.
Prior to my time there.
Okay. So he was the first winner, came from the Harrison.
Yes. So when I was at the Harrison in 2008.
Okay, so a couple years
It was later, and the Magical Elves called, and they were they wanted female contestants.
Mm-hmm.
And
So Magical
do.
Elves called. I'm like,
Just little fairies that would come out of
little fairies that
our
were
production company. Yeah.
the production company of Top Chef, and who
Yeah.
were
Project
Casting.
They did Project Runway for
Dan
15.
and Jane Cutforth?
Yes, they've since sold it, so they're not part of it anymore. They started their own company, and that company now does Project Runway. But yes, Magical Elves did Project Greenlight, Light, Project Runway, Top Chef. They do Nailed It and Sugar. They do a ton of other stuff.
They do a ton of stuff. So they called and asked about it. They explained a little bit about being in sequester and being gone for 6 weeks. And I just started this project as a chef. It was a big deal. And I said, I just can't do that. Mm-hmm. And I said, but I know somebody who could. And I recommended to my friend, Chef Arian Duarte, who was...
Of course, who did it. Thank goodness. Love
season
her.
5 or 6. Yes. Yep. So I said
Season
no a lot to television, and I understand Tom's reason for doing that. And I also respect his reason for wanting to be an EP, an executive producer, to keep the integrity, to not trust the television gods to go with it. But now... in this new season, you're going to be an executive producer.
Yes.
Congratulations.
That was a beautiful segue, man.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Oh, I've been a consulting producer for a long time, but we decided to make a lot of changes this season.
Great.
And luckily, there was enough movement with Padma leaving and a bunch of changes that were happening internally that allowed me to kind of take on a bigger role in the show. It kind of behind the scenes, but we've all always been like really communicative.
You always
it's
have
never
a lot of
been
input.
like I've been in the dark about things, and Tom has been, pulling the strings.
The mushroom.
That's right. It's always been very collaborative. I liked it.
Reference,
Yeah,
you know?
no, I like it.
I get it.
But it's true. But it just was great to feel like. Yeah, like even more so. And this season we did, for the first time in a long time, make a lot of like fundamental changes to the game.
Yes.
Which in a show that's been running like for 21 seasons is hard to do. You kind of get stuck in a format, and being able to make changes internally, getting everyone on board to make big changes, and then hoping that your audience goes along with it. Those are like big things in television because people like familiarity.
Yes.
Until they don't, and then they turn on you and your show gets canceled. So it's a very, you have to take educated steps that way. But I'm actually really excited about it because it feels like for the first time we're making changes that really change the way you watch the show.
Right. And I know that I'm sure you had a lot of input along with Tom because they were looking to you for guidance, right?
Yeah.
The connection between the magazine and the show. And I can say when we started Chopped as New York chefs, there were all the original judges. We worked really closely with the producers to say, okay, this doesn't work for a chef.
Right.
This doesn't
And
work
that was
here.
it.
Just
Or the
that
casting process
right,
too, what you realize.
Right, exactly. It's like, where did you get this person? They'll never make it through. The show's gonna collapse or whatever it may be. But I think you had to look to the people who knew about food and restaurants to meet with the television people and let them know.
Yeah, keep it legitimate. Otherwise, it's just for entertainment and it doesn't have anything real, and people can see through. And when something's not authentic, it is immediately
Yeah, absolutely. It's easy to spot.
It's in this day and age, we can all tell what's an advertisement and what's real.
Yeah.
That's true.
And I'm sure this happens on Chopped, any food competition that lasts, is that we learned really early, like in the first couple seasons, if not really the first 2 seasons, that if the audience doesn't trust us as the judges and doesn't want to listen to us, doesn't believe us, or thinks we're full of shit, they're turning it off because we are the only, we're the liaison, right? We're the piece between the viewer, we're the taste buds, right? We're the piece between the viewer and the chef. And so we are the piece that needs to connect them. And if we do a bad job or if we're assholes, it's a podcast. I can say these words, right?
Yes,
You're
you
allowed
can.
to use
You can say all the
word
words.
ass referring to a donkey or to the rectum of a beast or a person who
both. And so if then it's such an integral position to you that we're that like pivotal thing.
Yeah.
And if the audience doesn't believe us, doesn't like us, if we're not likable or interesting to listen to or know what we're talking about,
they're tuning
They
out.
tune- they turn
I'm
on
imagining
you.
my wife
do.
screaming at the television.
Yes.
'Cause whenever there's something we don't agree with, she's like, she's Romanian, so she'll throw something at the TV. It's scary.
But that's good. We want
Yes,
that passion.
exactly.
We want our viewers
We
to be
do.
that involved.
And they're so invested in the contestants. Like Top Chef, the viewers are watching to root for the stories. And we don't see any of the stories. We're not privy to any of that while it's happening. We're only there for the food. So there's this kind of tension between us and them. So if we aren't true and constructive, then the viewers hate us immediately and won't stick around.
Do you get people screaming at you on the street for?
I mean, yeah, when we make a decision that they don't agree with, we
Yeah.
often have to really explain ourselves, and that's also part of that, right?
Yes.
That's part of being clear and explicit in your
That's why you get really good
criticism.
at articulating your judgments.
right, because they will turn on you.
Yes.
Is television so you've had your hand in on face to face in a medium in the restaurant. You've written stuff in print, and obviously you have a presence online and in television. Do you think that this is your medium moving forward, or do you see yourself You have a lot to say, not just kind of like about food, but you have a lot to say. And
Right? Yeah. Sometimes
you're-
doesn't mean anyone wants to hear it.
It's in
but-
your bio from the beginning. You're quite insightful and intelligent.
I know what she's going to do when she retires. She's going to be a canoe instructor.
Oh, right. That's deep. Yeah. Wow. You really went. You dug, guys.
Dip, and
Did I
swing
mention
it
I was from
down.
Canada?
Yes. Does anybody know this little tidbit about
don't
Gail?
know.
Are you a
do.
huge? You're
I
a huge
was a
fan?
canoe instructor.
A
Yes.
canoe instructor.
niche.
Is that the most Canadian thing
There's
about
nothing.
Can you just
better.
say, just to verify you're Canadian, get out the boat?
I don't know how I'm going to say that, but I will say it, and you can tell me. Get out the boat.
Get out the boot? What?
Did I say get out the boat?
you? Her
You're
I've,
been-
you
it's
know
been
that I
beaten out of you.
just
You did
I
not.
just
You're the-
turned I just turned I don't know what the word is. I just surpassed the moment where I have now officially lived in the United States longer than I lived in Canada.
There's definitely a word
wow.
for that. I don't know what. I think it's called being
Old.
You're still American because it's all America, but yeah.
Well, now I am both. I just became a citizen last year.
Oh, wow.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you,
Is
but
there a
I've-
test for that?
Yes.
yes.
And I
hard one.
guarantee it's harder than
That
any
most-
I just
Americans-
bet, I bet
most
it's
Americans
stuff
could
that you
not.
just learned once but don't remember from
That could
like
be a great game show.
elementary school civics. You want to know what's an interesting fact?
Yeah.
I'm going to stay apolitical when I say this, but an interesting fact is that when I applied to be a citizen, I applied in February of 2020.
Oh.
Trump was president, and a month later, the pandemic hit, and our applications, my husband and I, our applications just kind of like, disappeared for a
Because
while.
he was as well.
He was
applying?
also, we did nothing for each other from a citizenship standpoint. He's a lovely man, but useless in getting me a green card. So we applied together, but everything slowed down during
Yeah.
the pandemic. And by the time our tests and, swearing in ceremony
applications.
came and our application came through, now Biden was president. And interestingly enough, the citizenship test, when Obama was president, was a certain test. When Trump became president, he changed the test. He took off a lot of questions to do with slavery, emancipation, the Civil War, civil rights. He took off all of those questions.
Interesting.
Apparently.
He helped to rewrite history,
Correct.
make America like a cleaner, better place.
And then when Biden came into his administration, he reinstated all those questions. So if I had done the test just a few years before, it would have been a different test, interestingly enough.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that they did that. I thought it was just like this is
You
the
think
actual.
they had
thing.
other
No,
things to worry about, and that the test would be the test about the history of the country, but that's not true. But and we were just talking about this last night because my husband told me that he read something that if you have grandparents from Poland, you're eligible to be a Polish citizen, which could get you
European,
EU.
amazing.
passport. So my grandfather was Polish. I mean, he left when he was 13, but he was born in Poland. I wonder if there's even record. Who knows, right? It was like 1918.
We were
That'd be a
from
great thing to
Bialystok,
have.
Poland. I had rabbinical rootstock.
There you
Wow,
the 17th
Bialystok. That is the OG.
Literally.
I mean, we are probably related.
Yeah, I mean, we left in like the 1700s. I actually, I was opening the restaurant Lower East Side, and this guy came in. I thought he just wanted free food, but he's like, I'm your distant cousin?
No.
And he had a passenger manifest from like grandparents that lived in the Lower East Side, Ellis Island. I mean, the whole thing. It was incredible. And I've got this history, and there was this old picture of this Jewish man with his hat and this black outfit, and if you zoomed in,
It was your
looked
face.
exactly like me.
Didn't Seth Rogen make a movie about this?
Literally, I was like, "Oh my god, I'm a old man
Yes,
from like the 60s."
yes.
It was incredible. Yeah.
That's wild.
And he sewed. He was a haberdasher or something. Like that. Haberdasher.
He
A hat
crafted.
maker?
He did things with his hands.
No, that's a milliner. Haberdashery is
haberdasher. Yeah, so he was
tailoring.
a tailor.
I think finding out about your ancestry like that and knowing like that kind of craft was in your blood.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make you feel like you have a piece of
It makes
history?
me feel like I belong here, and that food for sure makes me feel like I'm providing an honest living, and I can feel good about what I do every day.
Yeah.
You should.
On the Lower East Side, where it all started.
And you live in Brooklyn, right?
I do.
Yes.
I do. Not in Williamsburg. I'm 15 years too old to live in Williamsburg. But I live in Cobble Hill, which I love. Which I
great
I
neighborhood.
just moved there a decade ago when I had children.
It's a great
A
neighborhood.
great neighborhood, real
best.
New York neighborhood.
Real
It's
New York
the best, and
neighborhood.
also has like a really fascinating New York history. Like I
Yes.
love. We live in an old church actually that was converted, sadly, because the
Because
the
you bought
population change. No, yes, but no, it was converted before we got there because it really is an old Italian American neighborhood that has a Catholic church on every block. Like the number of Catholic churches in my neighborhood is
The
unsustainable.
amount of guilt in Cobble Hill
It's
must be
unbelievable.
It's intense.
And because the population changed and it was no more exclusively an Italian American Catholic neighborhood, no one was going to all these churches, so they converted them to condos, and that's where we moved.
I love New York history because when you look back at those maps where it's like some farmland and churches and nothing in between. Like,
I know, wild.
It's unreal to see us all living on top of each other now.
The best piece of historical fact in my neighborhood is that there's a giant Trader Joe's at the corner of Court Street and Atlantic
exactly where that
Avenue.
is.
You
We all know
can
that
picture
one.
the Trader Joe's.
Yes.
And there is it's an old bank building. And there is a plaque on the side of the bank building, which I never noticed until my daughter learned American history, Revolutionary history, which I never learned because I'm not American. I didn't learn American history. And to never notice until my daughter learned this fact that it is the reason it's called Cobble Hill is it is actually on a hill, and that bank building where Trader Joe's is now was the hill that George Washington stood on to watch like the Battle of Yorktown during the Revolution. Wow. And there was like a plaque
Delicious crab cakes as well in the
and
freezer
like
section.
amazing chocolate peanut butter cups
Unbelievable.
and soup dumplings.
I mean,
But
history
George
was made.
Washington stood on
That's
that hill.
incredible.
Waiting for snacks.
Yeah, waiting.
For those of you
Waiting
who are
in line
listening, that's
for
the
the-
guy on the
He was in
dollar
line.
bill as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. You're just, to me, an inspiration and always just a light, a
Thank
bright
you.
light in this amazing industry that we get to play with.
It is.
Food and love, and we get to educate people through entertainment.
Thank you. You guys are the best. It's been such a pleasure.
Being here was just yet another example of your generosity,
Ah,
your kindness,
this was low hanging
your
fruit.
magnanimous.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll take it. Thank you guys. You're the best.
Yeah. On the Line was recorded in New York City at Dubway Studios. Thanks, Al. Our studio engineer and editor is Mark Frangelo.
Our theme song is an original composition generously donated and played by Chef John DeLucci.
Our producer is Cindy Augustine, and our co-producer and publicist is Jesse Gerstein.
That's all, folks. Thanks for listening.